Jen, we're delighted to have you here. Welcome to the AI Sustainability Center in Stockholm. We just hosted a seminar on AI, responsible AI in practice. You were our keynote, and we hosted the seminar together with Google Sweden. So do you want to tell us about the Google AI principles and how you sustain your ethical values and principles?
Yes, so thank you for hosting me. It was a great morning, a lot of interest and engagement from the audience. So Google's AI principles, we launched them last year, and they're 7 aspirational guidelines we want to achieve. These are things like we want to be socially beneficial. We want to ensure that we're keeping data private. We want to test for safety. We want to ensure that we do not create or reinforce bias. We want to ensure that we make that technology available to other people and that we're accountable to people. And finally, number 7 is making sure that these achieve scientific excellence, that we're following best practices. But at the same time as launching those 7, we also described 4 red lines and technologies we will not do. So these are generally not causing harm, ensuring that we're not developing weapons technology, that we're not developing technology that can be used for surveillance against international norms, and ensuring that we're aligning with and not violating human rights. So all of those are how we now develop and deploy AI technology in Google.
That's so interesting. We at our center, we have fundamentals as well, and they are accountability, explainability, transparency, and AI governance. And there was a discussion, Elaine, you were moderating the panel on the explainability aspects that are not included in your principles, but it's embedded. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, so explainability is embedded in our be accountable to people principle. So be accountable to people covers many different things. It's not just about ensuring people can understand how we make decisions and how they're affected by AI, but also allowing them to potentially contest or appeal a decision. So if they disagree with something, how can they essentially find a way to get recourse for that? Accountable to people also means we listen to people and we provide user feedback channels and otherwise. But explainability to us actually is related to many different topics, not just transparency, but explainability for us is how does an end user understand how they're affected by an algorithm. But we also need to make sure that a developer understands how an algorithm makes a decision so they can debug it or work on errors. We also want policymakers and academics to understand our algorithms, so it's about sharing more information. So for us, explainability is just one part of many different ways we want to be accountable to people, so that's why we slotted it under the accountable to people principle. But we're doing a lot of research on explainability and interpretability, and we're making that research and the tools in order to provide explanations and interpretations available as well on our Google AI website.
So how in such an enormous company, how do you have these aspirational principles, which of course is the first step on any journey in dealing with risks around AI and making sure that the benefits of AI happen and that there's really a positive impact on society. So when you have those principles, how do you make sure in such a huge corporation, when you have so many different functions, departments, everything from technical developers, data scientists, to salespeople, to executive team, how do you, we're really curious to hear, how do you put them into practice? We work a lot here with developing a systematic framework for doing that, but it would be really interesting to hear, how do you make sure every day and every month and every year now that those will be applied and followed up?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge, and we believe it has to be tackled at from many different angles, from bottoms up to top down. So one of the key things for us was ensuring that we had executive buy-in. So Sundar, our CEO, was the one who announced our AI principles last year to show that from the highest level of Google, this is important and we're all being held accountable to it. And then having an executive body who review and make decisions on what's launched and what doesn't launch. But at the same time, we have people across the company conducting research across many different teams on these areas of ethics and fairness. We also have teams like mine who build central structures to ensure that where is that information being aggregated? How do we make it available to all the different people in many different functions? Is that information tailored to their function? So whether you're coming from the legal department, from the product or engineering side or operations, how do you know what the principles mean for you? So providing best practices and guidelines. And then centrally, we have a team of senior experts across the company who also inform the decisions that we're making. So really it's about getting people across all levels of the company from many different functions, but also being transparent from a top-down perspective that these are expectations. There are company-wide goals set for them, and it's required so people know that this is supported top-down, but also that they won't be punished or otherwise for following these principles, which may sometimes mean a slowdown in a launch, but also will ensure that AI or advanced technology is more successful when it launches. We do believe that responsible AI is successful AI, and we want to ensure that we're training people on that mentality as well. So we also provide training across the...
And you mentioned in the panel that in that ethics committee that sometimes you say no. Can you give an example of where you said no and how common it is to say no?
Yeah, so we have said no to a few products and research that we felt did not align with our AI principles, or that we weren't able to answer questions related to the principles sufficiently in order to feel comfortable. So an example here is we have not yet made facial recognition available as an API. We use facial recognition, facial clustering, facial detection in our own products, like in Google Photos. It's what allows us to group photos together by family members or otherwise. But we've not made that available publicly because we believe there are a lot of key questions around fairness about the applications of facial recognition. So we decided not to launch that until we've wrestled with a lot of these key questions. So we're trying to figure out, by answering against all of our AI principles, doing a lot of research, working with external bodies, civil rights groups, human rights groups, to understand that better. But essentially that was a no until we may have a better answers to these questions going forward. So it may not happen often, because we also trust our employees and colleagues that they're trying to think of these best products, but we have said no when we don't feel we could align with our AI principles.
I want to quote you, Elaine, from the seminar, because you have a huge, enormous responsibilities over us as actually your experience or experiment, your sandbox, and to create trust, and not only to create trust among Western societies, but also to create trust that you are not accelerating the digital divide and the divide both when it comes to norms, creation of norms and values, but between countries and within countries. Do you realize your responsibilities, and can we as the experiment mices be safe and trust you?
Yeah, so we don't consider the use of the experiments. We consider that our products should already be at a high quality before we make it live, but we do learn. We certainly do try and improve our products over time, but we learn from user feedback and by engaging in behaviors to improve that product, because we do a lot of testing internally. But there is still that question of, do we acknowledge our responsibility? Do we know our role in society? And we do. We take that very seriously to try and be responsible players, not just by launching these principles, but also by working on democratizing access to technology. So for example, making technologies open source. We made our TensorFlow engine open source, and that allows other people to build AI ML technologies on top of our platforms.
Can I just comment on that? Because I feel sometimes that organizations feel that new technology to increase efficiency is a right to have, but actually there needs to be some slowdown in the accessibility and the rollout of technology that we actually do not know how to explain, govern, and see the results of from a broader societal perspective. So launching out open source is not only a good thing, and having the courage to say no, and even when it's conflicting with profits, it is a responsibility when it comes to rolling out technologies in countries that cannot afford the consciousness or the discussions about when efficiency actually is a split from morality.
Yeah. No, you make an excellent point about the dual use of technology. It can be a force for good, but it also could lead to negative outcomes. And so being very thoughtful, having to wrestle with some of these questions and slow down is very important. But it goes back to our responsibility as well, that we do have resources to conduct the research that startups or smaller businesses may not have. So it is important that we continue sharing our research around not just the technical side, but also the responsibility and ethics side. So for example, at the same time we launched the principles, which are quite high level, it's about the interpretation and the best practices of how do you achieve those principles. And we launched that at the same time. We have a series of best practices and guidelines. We launched tools, we launched research, so other companies have the tools and knowledge that they need in order to be more ethical and fair. We acknowledge that not every company can restart the clock or rebuild the wheel in order to be ethical and fair, so we're making that available at the same time that we're making the technology available, and we think that those two should go hand in hand. Technology, responsibility.
So maybe a last question to you before you go. What keeps you up at night? I mean, you have these principles now, and your talk about how they're implemented. What's next on your agenda? What will you do over the next 12 months to, really push this issue forward in Google, but also globally? Yeah.
Well, this is certainly an ongoing process. We have not answered or solved anything. We are merely better than we have been before, and that's going to continue to be our journey, is keep getting better, keep defining the problems we're trying to solve, working with expert groups, and external people to address these questions. That one of the biggest areas, and I mentioned it today, is around, especially in the area of fairness and bias. It means so many different things to different people, but there are people we know who are more likely to be negative affected than others. It's about that intersectionality, that marginalized groups and their intersections are who are more likely to be negatively affected. So how do we do more research in that space, understand it better, understand very human problems? These aren't just technology problems, these are human problems, and how do we get that mitigated against in our technology as well? So many open questions, excited to keep making progress, but we are not thinking we've answered questions, but that we are moving towards better outcomes.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And Jen, just a final remark. We have a vision of human-led AI and human in the loop, and we will follow your work or principles closely, and want to welcome you back to our center.
Great, thank you so much. And yes, we all need to be working together on this. Not one group, not one company is going to solve this. So working together is hugely important. Thank you for working on it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.